Hello, welcome to Octokeeper's devlog series. Octokeeper is an action RPG where you have to take care of a baby octopus. I am making this project as a solo developer in my free time. The game will feature combat and puzzle solving, but the most important aspect of Octokeeper is taking care of the baby octopus. The idea is to create a system resembling the old Tamagotchi toys, where the way you took care of the creature determines how it will grow. I made a Twitter account for the game. Follow it if you want to get frequent updates of Octokeeper. This week I work a bit on the hunger system of Octokeeper. The baby octopus loves apples, and the player can find them in the ground or hanging from trees. I also decided an animation style for the trees of the game. Also, this happened. But let's see the progress step by step. This week I decided to get into designing the hunger system of Octokeeper. I want this system to be pretty straightforward. The baby octopus needs food, you have to find it. I think this will bring a sense of exploration to the game, depending on my level design skills. For this I will need animations and new code. The food value will be serialized in the food object, so I can modify it at any time. I started making the animations in Sprite. The character will offer the apple to the baby octopus, and it will chew on it. The problem with the baby being in the backpack is that in some angles the baby will not be visible. So I decided to make the animation in only one direction. We will see how this turns out. The apple itself is included in the animation, as it will be a bit difficult to program the movement on an individual object. And as the animation for the baby octopus and the character are also individual, I had to decide in which frame the apple will go, to the player's hand, to the baby's. I also made a different sprite for the apple. The one I had in the prototype was too big to fit in the baby's octopus hands. Then I imported the new sprites in Unity. I had to configure them as the rest of the art of the game, using the correct pixel per unit ratio, removing compression and slicing the sprite sheets to obtain the individual images. Another important step of this process is using the correct pivot point. Next, I made the actual animations on Unity, one for the player and another for the baby octopus. In case of the baby's one, I included the Y position in the animation, because as I said in a previous episode, this determines the order in which the sprite is drawn. If I wouldn't change this value and have the exact Y position for the baby and the player, they will have the exact same sorting order, and the baby will probably be drawn on top of the player. I also needed to modify the food object of the prototype. The image I used was too big for the new animations. Also, I removed the collision with the food entirely, as being this small, it doesn't make sense to have the player colliding with it. The shadow was also too big, so I made a new one. The shadow image will be drawn on top of a background tileset, with a lowered opacity. Then, it was time to start coding the behavior of this apple. I included a reminder for my future self for a new mechanic I thought about. A new type of enemy that will be able of snatching the baby octopus and run away with it. Something similar to Yoshi's Island with Baby Mario. I needed to create a new state for the player's controller component. While the player is feeding the baby, he will not be able to move. Then I used the animation manager I made for the prototype, for playing the feeding animation. I only had to tell the animation manager which animation I wanted to play. I made the same thing with the baby octopus object, but I needed to figure out how long were these animations, because the player will not be able to move until the end of the animation. For that, I needed to add a new function to the animation manager. This function will return the duration of the current animation. When the player interacts with an apple, a timer will be set, using current time and adding the duration of the animation. When this timer is up, the player will return to the idle state of the player controller and will be able to move again. I also wanted to play some chewing noises when the baby octopus receives the apple. Playing sounds at specific points of an animation is easy with Unity's animation events. Animation events are like signals that can trigger a function in a specific frame. Instead of using the audio manager I made for the prototype, I decided to include the audio in the baby itself. I made it this way because the octopus will grow in different ways, and I want to link a specific sound for a specific octopus. For example, the baby might grow into a ball octopus that goes around collecting its own food, while a coward octopus might stay in the backpack and only eat when the player feeds him. I imagine those different octopus making different eating sounds. Here is the first test of the eating mechanic. The chewing sound had a noticeable delay, so I moved the animation event to an earlier frame. I also modified the apple object so it can be used more than once, but only for testing purposes. I also needed to modify the interaction part of the food object a bit. When the player interacts with an apple, the animation will play and the apple object will disappear. Here was the result. With the system working, I move on to create a new tree for these apples. The tree I made for the prototype was too small in my opinion, so I made something bigger. I also want to animate the trees, but it's a really hard task. I heard of a program called JuiceFX. It can be really useful for animating pixel art stuff. You have multiple effects that can be controlled with sliders and values, and also supports multiple sprite layers and different frame per second results. I will leave a link in the description. Its price is pretty cheap. I applied some movement to the animation and a wave effect. Here was the result. I wasn't totally happy with how this tree came out, so I decided to make another one. This time I separated the branches of the tree to see if I can come up with a better effect. But that didn't work either. I wanted to use JuiceFX to ease the workload of animating a tree by hand. So I ended up animating the tree frame by frame in a sprite. I rotated the branches a bit each frame to generate a wind effect. Then I imported the sprites into Unity and made the animation. The good thing about this approach is that there are less frames than using the JuiceFX method. The left tree uses 30 frames, while the one in the right uses 7. Next, I made the shadow of the tree. Someone on Facebook pointed out that it would be better if the interactable objects had rounded shadows, while trees and other scenery objects should have realistic shadows. For this, I used the top of the tree and resized it. Then I imported the shadow images into Unity and made the animation. Here was the result. I asked the community for feedback and most people liked the one in the right better. But maybe I could use the left effect in other objects of the game, for underwater plants or something like that. I made another animation for when the tree is getting hit. The idea is to let the players hit trees and make the apples fall down. For this, I used the same interface I added to the hit points component. Interfaces are a great way of managing functionalities in different objects. I learned how to use them in this CodeMonkeys video. You will have a link in the description. Anyway, when the tree is hit, the animation will play. I tried making the tree go back to the idle animation using Unity's blend system, but this was a bad idea, as it conflicts with my own animation manager system, which is frame-based. For some reason, using Unity's blend system made the tree being only interactable once, so I changed it back to use the animation manager I made. The tree will play the idle animation once the hit one is done. Now it was working properly. The next and last thing I did this week was hanging the apples from the trees. The tree will have to be hit a couple of times before these apples drop to the ground. As you can see, this mechanism was working perfectly at first try. At some point, the apples became self-aware and started to be passive-aggressive. And worse than that, the player could alter reality and grab the apples directly from the trees. But some tweaking in the code corrected that. No more passive-aggressive apples and characters altering reality. Although, if I added more apples to the tree, they will fall in a perfect line. While this is aesthetic, this is altering reality once again. With a few adjustments, the apples should fall perfectly. As I said, the apples should fall perfectly. Wait a minute, where are the shadows? Ah, they were hiding because a mistake I made. Now, finally, the apples are in the ground and I can feed the baby octopus. And that was my week. Thank you so much for the support and watching the progress of Octokeeper. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you have any ideas for the channel or the game, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, see you next week.